Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Eleni, and I'm a consultant for sustainable procurement and the host of this webinar. Thank you for joining us today for delegations and how they influence and impact procurement. We are very happy and grateful that you could join us today. Now, before we start off, I would like to start with an acknowledgement. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land from which we are joining today at LGP, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. We also acknowledge the traditional owners of the many lands from which you are viewing this webinar. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I would also like to extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander today joining us today. Now, before we kick off, just a little bit of housekeeping. This webinar will be recorded and will be made available on our website for future access. You'll see that microphones have been muted. However, feel free to post your questions via the Q&A and chat box, and we will answer them during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. If we do not have time to get through all the questions due to time constraints and limitations, Mihaela, our speaker, will ensure that we have the responses emailed to you. Now, without further delay, I would like to introduce our presenter today, Mihaela Stancu. Mihaela is a passionate and experienced procurement professional committed to leading our sector in best practice procurement, who believes in LGP's mission to lift, educate, enhance strategic and sustainable procurement capabilities in local government. As a consultant, Mihaela uses her diverse and robust experience in procurement, local government, and previous exposure in other industries such as petrochemical and energy. Her focus is providing solutions to customers to achieve their goals and to elevate their procurement capabilities. Now, without further ado, Mihaela, over to you.
Thank you very much, Eleni. Thank you, everybody, for making time to join us today. It's a very busy time of year, and I appreciate to have your company. A few years ago, we started this series of webinars for councils, and we had to consider topics that are very close to your roles and how we can help you. And I was thinking that my webinars will be more or less procurement stories. And basically, I'm going to share things that I have learned throughout the years while doing my role. And today's webinar is linked to a project which I managed not a long time ago, an audit for one of the councils, and is related to delegation of authority and the impact which this has on the procurement activities. In today's webinar, I will be covering what is delegation of authority, what is included in the policy, why the delegation of authority is critical, the impact it has on procurement, risk associated with the delegation of authorities. I will then share some examples of issues with delegations and contract variations and provide some recommendations. And I will conclude my presentation with best practices. The session will finish with a Q&A session. And as my colleague Eleni mentioned, if we do not have the time to answer questions, I'll be more than happy to share the answers via email afterwards. So, what is a delegation of authority policy? You can see one of the definitions, and it is a formal policy or framework which outlines how decision-making powers and responsibilities are distributed within an organization. It specifies who can make certain decisions or approve actions, such as financial commitments, contract signing, or procurement activities, what the limits of that authority are, for example, monetary threshold or types of contracts, and how accountability is maintained, ensuring that even when authority is delegated, the original delegator remains responsible for the outcomes. The delegation authority policy or framework includes types of delegations, and one of them is delegation authority, which I covered in a previous slide. Then we have financial delegation, which gives individuals or roles the authority to approve expenditure or enter into financial commitments on behalf of organizations. We have contractual delegation, which gives individuals the authority to negotiate, enter into and sign contracts with suppliers or service providers. It may include the ability to approve contract variations or extensions subject to specified limits. Operational delegation is about who has authority to make decisions related to day-to-day operations, such as approving leave, managing staff, overseeing specific projects. Delegations can be to committees or subcommittees. Councils and organizations may delegate certain powers to committees or subcommittees, enabling them to make decisions or recommendations within defined areas. For example, audit, procurement, or planning committees. Delegations can be given to other authorities. Sometimes they are made to local authorities or external bodies for joint activities or shared services. The framework includes the delegates, which can be individuals. So we have the CEO or directors or council staff who may have different limits of delegations. Delegates can be, as I said previously, committees or subcommittees, local authorities. A policy talks about delegation register. Council should maintain delegation register which record all delegated powers and individuals or bodies to whom they are delegated to ensure transparency and accountability. There is the limitation of each delegation, noting that certain critical decisions, such as setting the council budget or adopting major policies, cannot be delegated and must be made by the full council through resolution. Last but not least, the policy specifies the annual review to ensure that they remain appropriate and effective. This review process helps in adapting delegations to any changes in council structure or priorities. So why delegation authority is critical? Well, delegation authorities are essential because it ensures compliance. Actions and decisions comply with legislation, regulations, internal policies, and reduces the risk of unauthorized commitments and legal breaches. It's critical because it improves accountability, ensuring that even when authority is delegated, the original delegated remains responsible for outcomes and provides a clear framework for monitoring and reporting. Supports organizational objectives, aligns procurement and financial decision with council's goals and priorities, promotes operational efficiency, enabling quicker decision-making at appropriate levels, empowering employees to take ownership of their roles, allowing senior leadership to focus on strategic priorities. Last but not least is critical because strengthens governance and risk management by clearly defining who can make what decision and under what conditions, maintains robust control and audit trails, supporting accountability and transparency, and helps segregate duties, reducing the risk of fraud and errors. Procurement, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, is very much so impacted by the delegation of authorities, and here's how. First of all, it's about the approval threshold. Procurement activities often involve financial commitments, and delegation authority policies define who can approve purchases at various monetary levels, escalation paths for higher value transactions, limits for contract signing, purchase orders, and supply agreements. For example, a procurement officer may approve purchases up to $10,000, while anything above that requires a manager or director sign-off. Another impact of the delegation authority is related to contracting authority, because it determines who can negotiate and sign contracts with suppliers, whether legal or executive review is required for certain types of agreements, the scope authority for entering into binding commitments. Procurement, as we know, is exposed to risk like fraud, overspending, and non-compliance. And delegation authority helps mitigate this by ensuring segregation of duties. For example, a requester cannot be an approval, enforcing audit trails and accountability, aligning procurement decision with corporate governance. It impacts operational efficiency because a well-structured delegation authority speeds up routine purchases by empowering frontline staff, reduces bottlenecks in approvals, and enables decentralized procurement where appropriate. Strategic procurement decisions are very much influenced by delegation authorities because high-impact decisions such as supply selection, long-term contracts, it's important that involves senior leadership, cross-functional collaboration, alignment, organization goals. It's very important that modern procurement systems often embed delegation authority rules, such as automated routing of approvals, real-time enforcement of threshold, audit logs for compliance, and reporting. So those are some of the ways in which delegation authorities impact the procurement activities. Now I would like to touch on some risk associated with the delegation authorities if best practices are not in place. For example, lack of clarity and ambiguity. If the delegation authority policy is not clearly defined, staff may be uncertain about their limits of authority, and this can lead to decisions being made by unauthorized individuals, overstepping of authority, or conversely, delays due to hesitation and confusion, ambiguity about who is accountable for specific actions or approvals. Risk number 2, infrequent updates. If the delegation authority is not reviewed and updated regularly, it may become misaligned with organizational changes, new legislation, or evolving business needs, which increase the risk of non-compliance with current laws or internal policies and outdated approval threshold or processes. If staff is not properly trained on the delegation authorities, we can see risks such as they may inadvertently breach policy or fail to follow correct procedures. There is a higher risk of errors, non-compliance, or even fraud. Over-reliance on manual processes instead of automated systems, that can result in errors or omissions in documentation, lack of audit trails, making it difficult to track decisions and hold individuals accountable. Risk of fraud can be increased or authorized transaction can take place. Another risk, and I keep saying another risk because there are quite a few of them, ambiguous or overlapping delegation can cause conflicts between teams members or departments, delays in decision-making due to disputes over who has the final say, accountability gaps where no one takes responsibility for a decision. If there is not adequate control and oversight, the risk of unauthorized commitments or financial exposure. Poor governance may result in reputational, financial, or legal consequences for the organization. If there is no segregation on duties and the same person is responsible for both requesting and approving actions, this can lead to increased risk of fraud or collusion. and lack of independent review and challenge. The delegation authority should be proactively monitored. Otherwise, it can result in undetected issues until they become significant problems. There may be delays in seeking additional approvals when expenditure approaches or exceeds authorized limits. I said at the beginning, and I mention it again, that this webinar is very much about what is common knowledge, but it's also about sharing my experiences from projects that I had a pleasure of managing. And there will be a couple of slides with issues which I encountered while doing an audit on delegations and variations. And here's the first issues. When reviewing, it was noted that the current delegation authorities are not clear with respect to the delegations for expenditure over $150,000 and what is considered approval by council resolution, in particular approval of a project budget versus a contract value. The recommendation is that the wording of the delegations should be revised to clarify who is responsible for expenditure over $150,000 and that the approval via council resolution relates specifically to the total value of expenditure under the contract, not a project budget that may include other costs and expenses. Issue number 2. There was ambiguity regarding the total value of expenditure that has been approved by council resolution and associated limit of delegations for director with respect to adjustment and variation. Our recommendation was to pursue a clear and formal council resolution to approve the total forecast expenditure under the contract, including all known adjustments, estimated future adjustments, and any additional risk or contingency amounts. This resolution should explicitly state the total value being approved, which will be then serve as the definitive limit of delegation for the director. Further adjustment and or increase beyond this limit must return to council for additional approval. It is important to maintain clear documentation and routine reporting to track committee expenditure against the approved value, ensuring transparency and accountability. Issue number 3. There was no clear accountability and proactive monitoring and management of expenditure to maintain governance over expenditure against the approved value. For this issue, we had a few recommendations, such as formalize accountability, assign a specific individual, such as the responsible director, to be clearly accountable for monitoring and managing expenditure against the approved value. This role should be documented in the delegation register and communicated to all relevant staff, especially those involved in the project. Implement proactive monitoring mechanisms to track committed and actual expenditure versus the approved limits. Use dashboards or automated reports to provide real-time visibility to decision makers. Have periodic reviews of expenditure status and if escalations are required, then do so to council or senior management when you see that spending approaches or exceeds approved thresholds. Consider introducing an independent oversight function, such as a project steering committee or governance managers to review expenditure reports, monitor compliance, provide advice or intervention when necessary. Escalate risk and issues or promote escalation of risk and issues where applicable. Identify where approval of additional funds needs to be proactively sought. Training and guidance is very, very important. If staff is not aware of up-to-date delegation authority and what the finance limits and responsibilities are, that can lead to issues related to who should be doing what, when, and so on. So it will cause further delay with approvals of variations. By implementing those measures, it will strengthen governance, ensure accountability, and reduce the risk of overspending or unauthorized commitments. The last issue that I want to touch on is the fact that there was no clarity regarding the process for applying delegations without causing delays to the project. So we, in the conversation council, one of the concern was, what do we do so we don't have to wait for further approvals and then the project gets further delays because we don't get approval for the variation. The recommendation was to obtain approvals before committing expenditure. Ensure that all necessary approvals are secured prior to issuing any instructions to contractors or suppliers that would commit the organization to expenditure. This prevents unauthorized commitments and support compliance. You can streamline approval processes by developing and documenting a clear step-by-step process for applying delegations, including escalation paths for urgent approvals. This should include identifying alternate delegates or backup approvers to avoid bottlenecks when primary delegates are unavailable. As we know, people get sick, go on leave, and there has to be a plan B. Proactive planning and communication. Work closely with project managers to anticipate upcoming approval needs, include contingency amounts in council resolutions, and develop internal cost estimates in advance so that approval can be sought proactively rather than reactively. Utilize automated approval workflows within procurement or ERP systems to route requests efficiently, enforce thresholds, and maintain audit trails. This reduces manual delays and ensures transparency. Train the staff, regular training, as I mentioned before. Clear guidance reduces confusion and speeds up decision-making. So all these recommendation can help clarifying the delegation process, reduce delays, and maintain strong governance throughout the project lifecycle. A couple of days ago, we received an email from a council staff who was interested in the webinar and asked if this webinar is going to touch on the contract variation. And I said, yes, of course, because this is the starting point, right? Variations to contract, which is a big problem for big contracts, big value contracts. And I created this slide for you to read. I'm not going to go through each sentence because I'm going to share with you. But basically, there are some suggestions in regards to sentences that you could use in your delegation authorities regarding managing variation. So you can look at them once you receive the slides. My presentation will conclude with best practices. Some of them you already heard are in form of recommendations to the 4 issues which I highlighted earlier. And it may seem that I'm repeating myself. So those recommendations for best practice are define clear roles and threshold. Clearly specifies who can make which decision and at what monetary or contractual limits. Use both written and matrix or chart formats to make the policy easy to understand. Make sure there's segregation of duties. Ensure that no single individual has end-to-end control over a transaction. The person requesting should not be the one who is approving. This reduces the risk of fraud and improves accountability. Independent oversight is a good practice because if you can establish an independent oversight role, such as project steering committee or governance managers, this person or committee can review decision, monitor compliance, and offer advice, and adds an extra layer of governance and risk mitigation. By proactive monitoring and reporting, compliance and tracking committed expenditure against approved values, you can ensure that you know when you're reaching the limit of the approved contract value. You should use routine reporting to identify risk early and escalate issues as needed. A very important best practice is clarity in council resolution. When seeking approval for contracts or expenditure, ensure that council resolutions clearly state the base contract value, any contingency amounts, the total value being approved, including contingency. This avoids ambiguity and ensures effective management of variations. Delegation authority should be reviewed periodically and should be updated to keep it aligned with organizational changes, new legislation, and evolving business needs. Ensure approval threshold and delegated authorities remain up to date as well. Train the staff regularly on the delegation authority policy to ensure everyone understands their responsibility and limits. Provide refresher sessions when policies are updated or when new staff join. And leverage technology, utilize automated approval workflows. So that's my presentation. Before we end the webinar, I would like to move to the last part of the webinar, which is the Q&A session. And for this session, I would like to invite Margaret Santo, who is the Director of Strategic Procurement Solution, a highly skilled procurement professional with 20 years of experience in local government and over 30 years in procurement. Prior to heading Strategic Procurement Solutions team, Margaret managed the tender team, chairing evaluations with a mix of council guest evaluators and LGP staff. In her role, Margaret advises us on complex or sensitive projects, conflict of interest matters, probity issues, negotiations, any other matters that may have a big impact on projects, community sentiment, policies, or instruments of government. Welcome, Margaret.
Yes, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having you. Ananda, do we have any question? Ananda is very kindly helping us with reading the questions if we have any questions.
Good morning, everyone. And yes, Mihaela, we have a couple of questions for you. The first one comes from Catherine Smith, and she asks, quick question, are you saying that a contract variation that comes through that exceeds the amount approved by the council needs to go back to the council no matter the amount? For example, if a 500K approved and a 25K variation comes through, does it need to go back to the council?
Because the original contract value approved is different than the amount that you need to variate, basically, yes. Because the council may have a budget available, but it doesn't mean that the council approved the expenditure. And the original approval is on that $500,000, and it does not cover the additional $25,000. It also depends on what the delegation authority policy of the council states. But as I said earlier, to avoid ambiguity and to put the directors in a position where they don't know what happens next, it's best that you take the approval for council resolution.
Thank you, Mihaela. It seemed Margaret had also chipped in and answered the question on the chat.
Oh, sorry, Margaret. I didn't see that.
We have another question from Mustafa Kamal. And his question is, if a procurement activity with an estimated value of X requires council approval, what is the allowable percentage increase during contract execution in form of variation before additional approval is needed? Do you want me to repeat it?
Yes, no, I've read it. So it's not about percentage. It's about, like, just as an executive for LGP, all of the executives have decision of approvals. Some of those are financial, some of those are not. But where it is financial, it's to the dollar. So this is not about leeway of percentages here and there. If I have delegation of authority to approve anything, any procurement up to $500,000, that is what I have approval for. Once you exceed that, I no longer have the approval for that. So it either has to go higher than me or it has to come back to me to reapprove something that's high. No, I can't. It's not my delegation anymore. So it has to go up to the next person to delegate. In the case where in councils where it goes to council, the delegation is that they're reapproving more funds that has exceeded the original amount that was approved. So I don't think it's a matter of percentages. It goes to council. The information that council received was something was going to cost $700,000, and that was what they provided as a delegation approval. So if it exceeds that even by $1 or $7, it doesn't matter. It has to go back to them for reapproval, because they have to go back to the budget and actually see whether or not that fits in there or not.
I just wanted to add that to be on a safe side, it's not 100% sure, but it's always recommended that when you go to council for resolution, you include a contingency amount, which is about 10% of the contract value.
Yeah.
And that can cover some of the variations, but obviously if you keep going up and up, you need further approval, as Margaret said, because there may not be funds available. So council has to commit to what they can actually pay.
Can I also add, when we talk about delegations of approval, we're talking not just about council making a decision. It's also about the people within council that have delegations of approval, because not everything goes to council. Yes, correct, Mihaela? Right, there are
Yes,
going to be
absolutely.
people. There are going to be people within council, whether it's the general manager, executive level directors. They all have different levels of delegation approval. Now, if it exceeds them, then it goes to the GM. Then it goes. If it exceeds the GM, then it has to go to council. But even as I said, even if the previous delegation has exceeded what council had previously approved, it still needs to go back to them. And I agree with Mihaela. What you need to do is probably, it's a balancing act. You need to probably have that contingency amount, but you can't over significantly add on to it, because it might be rejected, because council might say, no, that's too much money, we can't afford it. So you sort of have to make sure that you sit within a range that you can live with.
All right, thanks, Margaret. We have a lot of questions that have come in. There are two from Katya Juksa. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. First is, do you have a good example you can share of a clear delegation policy for procurement within a council, something we could use as a foundation to build on? And the second question by Katya again is, how would you answer this question? I believe my tender will fall within a specific delegation, but it may exceed that amount. What should I do?
Margaret, do you want to answer the first part?
I feel like we answered the example of delegation of approvals. Certainly send an email to SPS to Mihaela, and she can chat with you about how to put together a delegation of authority. But I would believe that every council actually has one. It's inconceivable for me that that there are no councils out, or there are any councils out there that don't have a delegation of authority, because it's necessary. It's part of the governance structure of every council. So I would look into that, but certainly we can help you. The second part of that, did you want to answer the second part, Mihaela? Which is?
I believe the question is, I believe my tender will fall within a specific delegation, but it may exceed that amount. What should I do?
So again, it's about, for instance, if the contract, if the recommended or successful tenderer's quote is, or tender is, I don't know, $250,000, but you believe that it's going to be more, or as I said earlier, to be on a safe side just for a period of time, when you prepare the report for council for resolution, add in that contingency amount, 10% of what already you have as recommendation for the successful tenderer, because that will take you maybe for a short while to cover the variations, so you don't have to go back to council for approval. So you may have to go step by step, but if you have that contingency amount, as I said, for a while, it may cover some variations. Obviously, following the steps for approval, for the instructions and so on, because even with variations, you can't just accept them without having someone in council who actually looks at them. And I'm going to give you an example of this project that I was looking at. They had a variation started because the design company created design for the project, and they overlooked some aspects such as the content of the soil and so on. And then when you move to the construction side of the project, the builder said, but hang on a second, because I can't build here because the design is not correctly done. So some things happen because they were overlooked, but at the end of the day, the project has to continue and be finalized. It's about how you're going to manage these variations, checking that the request for increase of the amount from the supplying is accurate, and then giving instructions so that you pay for these variations once the council has approved that amount that is considered variation.
Thanks, Mihaela. We have an observation from Tony McCarthy. He says, fine for well-resourced and metro councils. Little chance in a small regional for a council to have these resources and strategies, left largely to the key financial delegates. Aware of the risks and consequences, but realistically a lot to do and other competing interests. Section 377 of LGA gives extensive powers to the GM to approve. This is at times in conflict with the key procurement delegations and needs clarification for when it is used and why. So that was
it's look at sometimes a delegation, like you said, legislation may conflict with the reality, but at the end of the day, I believe that if the council, regardless of the size, if the council has a procurement policy and procurement procedure that is clear to the staff, being the financial manager who has the highest power to approve funds before the GM, then at least staff who is available in council will know what they have to do next and what steps to follow. Because we know that small councils don't have procurement people or very few people. So that's why having procurement procedures, policies will help them navigate situation where they don't know what to do. And when it comes to the legislation, unfortunately, it is something that it's out of our control. And that's why when you create the policy and procedures for the procurement activities, you put content in these documents which specify, okay, so this is the legislation, but there are some situations where we may be able to manage in this way.
Thanks, Mihaela. We have, I know I'm mindful that we're a bit over time.
Yes,
but there
maybe
are a lot
one
of
more
questions.
question. I'm glad, because it means that people are interested.
And
It's
there are
just that we're
still
running out of time.
And we still have a lot of people who are with us, staying on. So we have a question from Russell Wallace. How do we clarify which council functions can be delegated? and which ones must stay as council resolution functions?
Margaret, pass it on to you.
There are certain things, I mean, at the end of the day, your clarification comes down to the delegations of authority. Every council should have a register that clearly sets out what the delegations are, who has them, and what those limits are. I know that when I was working with account, we did a review when we did our one of the procurement reviews with Mahela, and when we do a procurement review, we look at a lot of documents, and the register for delegations of authority is one of those. It should be, I believe, a document that should be accessible for anyone in procurement or anyone spending money. They should have a link to it or be able to access it, and that would clearly state what is and is not things that you could delegate. There are certain responsibilities and obligations that council, as a council, cannot delegate to, let's say, an outsourced entity, because this is not just about financial delegations, it's about all kinds of approval processes. For example, a lot of the times when we talk to council and my people facilitate tenders, some of them are huge tenders, and some councils obviously have issues around resourcing. I would like to outsource all of the evaluation to a third party, and that's a conversation we normally have where we're talking to councils that is one thing that council cannot fully delegate out. They must have people council must be the decision makers in a tender situation, so that when they're running the tender and you have the evaluation, you actually have council people making the decision, determining who is going to be the front runner. Because if it's not, and if council were to delegate all of the evaluation out to a third party, and then at the end of the day something goes wrong with the project where the contract has to be awarded to a person that is, or a company that is fully recommended by third party people, not council, then in that case, what does council do? So that responsibility of onus and responsibility of accountability sits with council and cannot be delegated out, not even by council. Certain decision making must be retained within the council itself. There are a lot of things that can be delegated. So there's a lot of things the councillors can delegate down to the GM, and then the GM can delegate down to other levels of staff. But there are some things that cannot be delegated, and all of that's covered off in the Local Government Act. As to underneath, there's a whole section that talks about delegations of authority.
Thanks, Margaret. And the best part is we have some knowledge sharing going on. Carla Jaden Samaha has chimed in with her views. She says the LG Act prescribes what can be delegated to staff and committees and what must remain with the council itself. See section 377 and 378 to start.
Thank you, Carla.
I'll take the last question, Mihaela, because it was posted long time back. Do LGP tender contracts need to be adopted by council prior to use?
They don't need to be, because we're part of prescription status. So LGP contracts fall under prescription. So the legislation already tells you that where you exceed the $250,000, you can either go to tender or you can use a prescribed entity. So you can use LGP contracts. However, some councils, when they're creating their procurement policies and then have council sign off on it, build in the different levels of when they use LGP contracts. So they might say, because different councils have different acceptances as to the levels that what needs to go to council and what doesn't. I know that there are some councils that are regional and small who like to take things up to council at the old rate of $150,000 because it still means a lot to them, and the councils want to be directly have oversight on those. So at the end of the day, it's up to the council how it wants to do it. certainly for any financial values that are underneath $250,000, they might build it into their policies, which are then, and the procurement policy signed off by council. So there's different variations as to when there is.
Thank you, Mihaela. I think we're running out of time.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, everybody, for standing with us and listening and sharing your knowledge. Really appreciate it. As Eleni said at the beginning, we will share the link to the webinar and the slides, and there will be a feedback survey, I think, to see whether you thought that this webinar was meaningful, and for all the questions that we didn't have time to answer, we will provide the responses in the next few days. It's a very busy time for everybody, but you will get the answers. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you very much.